What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 679. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, the season of Cube is upon us. We've got the Arena Cube out now, and I think Vintage Cube is coming back soon on Magic Online too.
Yeah, looking forward to both of those, of course. I mean, the Arena Cube, we've had it in our hands for about a day. And, well, we'll get to it in a second, but we got Arena Open this weekend featuring that cube, the first Cube Arena Open. So that's obviously hype. And then Vintage Cube season, of course, everyone's, waiting for that.
Yes, a very Merry Cubesmas to you and everybody listening. We're going to be talking about the Arena Cube this time for people that haven't yet dove in, or if they're looking to get a little bit of last minute prep work done for the Arena Open this weekend. We're going to talk about it in depth today on the show. So that's going to be the topic here. Before we get into that, let's talk about our sponsor, TCGplayer.com. They're joined by Channel Fireball, and they've teamed up to create a subscription that every Magic player needs. You can get exclusive CFB Pro content and free shipping and tracking on direct by TCG player orders, plus bonus bucks and awesome promos at TCGplayer.com. And that's just $6.99 a month. That's right. You get access to CFB Pro plus all the extra stuff for just $6.99 per month. So make sure you check that out. There's a link in the show notes to that if you're interested in it. There's also just the general link for the affiliate link, as they call them. So that's, if you click on that in the show notes, either on the website or on your phone or wherever, it'll just take you to TCG Player, but it like flags you that we're the ones that sent you over there, and it helps out the show. So if you do that, if you're going to make any purchases, we do appreciate it. And we want to thank TCG Player and Channel Fireball for their support of the show. The show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. Thank you to everybody who joined the Patreon recently. We really do appreciate it. If you want to join, you get a thank you card and a Limited Resources sticker in the mail. And we really appreciate everybody who joins. You also get access to some cool extra features like the Patreon question of the week post. This one comes from Melissa, who says, "Hello, Marshall and Luis. I hope you're doing well. I have a friend who nearly always plays 16 lands in his draft decks and often does very well, but we always tease him when he complains about being mana screwed. Can you describe your process for determining how many lands you should run in a deck and how often you should go for fewer than 17?
I mean, the way I look at it is 17 is the default. Absent any other information, just put 17 lands in your deck. And in fact, if you always put 17 land in your deck, you're probably not making much of an error, if at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say you look at 100 drafts, the average should be pretty close to 17. If you just play 17, you're probably not making a big mistake. That said, there are times when it's fine to play 16. 16 is the second most common number I play, which is basically decks that don't have that much in the way of high end, where it's not going to hurt too much if I don't have my fifth land on time. I maybe don't have anything that costs 6. Those are the decks that I'm more likely to play 16 in. And then once you get to lower land counts, there you're talking more about mono or near mono color decks, because part of the reason we play 17 lands isn't because we need 17 lands to function exactly. It's partially because of mana considerations, where if let's say you're playing, blue-green, mm-hmm. just like a normal curve deck, if all your lands are tropical islands, if they all tap for blue or green mana, you just got access to infinite tropical islands, you could probably play like 15 lands.
Yeah.
But because you need to have a certain number of islands and forests, to say most decks are just all basic lands, maybe one non-basic, you trend towards 17 because you want to make sure you draw one island, one forest every game. So if you've watched me stream or talk about these decks, sometimes if you draft like mono red, you play 15, 14 lands. Mono red also happens to have a low curve, or mono white. Like these decks, when you're monocolored, can often go down in land count because they have lower curves, and also because they don't need to worry about drawing, a swamp and a mountain each game. So when it's just mountains, play 15 mountains. In fact, I think your default monocolor land choice should be closer to 15 than anything else.
Right. And then the one other wrinkle that we should add in here for Melissa is if you're playing specifically on Arena Best of One, right? There is a hand smoothing function, right, that will sort of look at 2 opening hands and pick the slightly more balanced land one. That means that you mulligan far, far less in Best of One than you do in real life or in traditional draft. And that often means that you can, assuming you have a relatively normal curve, that you can often get away with playing 16 lands in that scenario rather than the 17. So you should keep that in mind as well, that what you're really doing in real life in a traditional is you're wishing you were playing 16, but you're leaning towards 17 to be safe and to cover all the bases that Luis described. But when you don't need a whole lot to get you to kind of, okay, I'm going to lean back over to 16, right? You would actually prefer to do what your friend does and play 16, but it usually doesn't work out in terms of both of the things that Luis described, which is just raw land count. How many lands do you need to function? But then also individual instances of colors, right? How many blue mana sources do you have in your deck? Sometimes you need to add an extra land so that you can get to enough. So keep that in mind, that it's, in my mind, it's useful to kind of understand which way you're leaning, even if you end up staying on 17 the majority of the time, because the times when you can lean away from it will become more apparent. And Arena Best of One is one of them. And then the other one is simple too. It's just if you have a very low curve, right, then you can sometimes get away with 16 or fewer.
Yeah, and then there's also, it's worth talking about the other side of that, which is sometimes you want to play 18 lands. And that's, or even 19, and that's when you have like a high curve deck with lots of ways to sink mana into the various things. And, you end up in a spot where it's actually worth playing slightly more lands than normal, though. Again, that doesn't come up very often either. Right.
That's not, those are things that are fairly rare, and you should be thinking of them as the exception. But when they do come up, it is important for you to know about them and to act on them. So great question, Melissa. Thanks for that. Luis, let's do a couple of crack-a-packs here. And this is going to kind of lead us into our broad strokes discussion of the Arena Cube. And I'll start off by saying, before we do the crack-a-packs, that there is an arena open this weekend that you mentioned at the top there, Luis, and it is draft for both days, and it's Arena Cube for both days. That is absolutely, we've talked about.
Wait, it's draft on day one?
It is.
Oh, that's even better than I thought.
Yeah. So it's not some weird sealed. It is draft on day one. And this thing is, this is the pure dream, right? we have now entered, like, if I told you, hey, Wizards of the Coast is coming out with a new digital client for Magic, you'd be like, great, I've had enough Magic Online or whatever. So here we go, right? Then it comes out, and then I said, okay, they're going to do booster draft on it. Okay, here's booster. Okay, you're already pretty happy, right? You're like, all right, I can draft on this thing. It's on my phone. I'm happy with where this is at. But man, if I said, well, what would you really like? You might start with like, well, boy, if I could play like a weekend tournament for real money, like that would be pretty cool. Okay, well, dream bigger, right? And the end game for Luis and I would be, if I can play a competitive cube weekend tournament where I could win $2,000 from my home or on my phone, as Luis somehow does, that's it, right? Like that to me is there is nothing I would want more than that, right? That to me is the pinnacle for what I could expect from a digital product like this. And we have it now. Like this weekend we have reached the Holy Land, and it is 2 days of cube draft for thousands of dollars. Couldn't be better than that.
Yeah, if you told me, 5 years ago that I'd be able to cube draft for thousands of dollars from my phone without having to, at my leisure, without having to commit to an all-day tournament or anything like that, I would be like,
fly.
Yeah, I'd be like, what is going on? But no, that's where we're at, and I'm pretty stoked for it.
Yeah. So just to outline that, the event itself. So it's this weekend, December 17th and 18th. Day one is you have two choices. You can do best of one matches, or you can do best of three matches. If you decide for best of one, you need to get to 7 wins before you get to 3 losses to secure your day 2 slot. If you play best of 3, you need to get to 4 wins before you get to, I can't remember. Is it single limb? Yes, 1 loss.
Yeah, it's single.
Yeah. So before you get to a single loss. So it's a little hardcore there. You have to go 4-0 in best of 3s to make it. But that is a thing that can happen. So that's day one. And then day 2 is similar to the last one we did. In fact, it's the same as the last one we did, where you show up, you do the early morning draft, and yes, you do have to register between 6 and 8 a.m. Pacific, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of tough. But then you do a draft. It is 4 rounds of traditional. If you get either a 3-1 or a 4-0 record, you will advance to the second draft on Sunday. But there is a difference. If you get a 4-0, you have a loss to give in the second draft. If you get to 3-1, you don't. It's effectively single elimination on day 2, or on draft 2, excuse me. And then when you get to draft 2, if you win 0 times, you will get 5,000 gems, which is actually kind of a thing. If you win once, you will get 15,000 gems. If you win twice, you'll get $500, excuse me, plus a qualifier weekend invitation. If you get to 3 wins, you get 1,000 plus the invitation. And if you get to 4 wins, you will get $2,000 plus the invitation. So similar structure, same structure, I guess, as the last time we had the double draft there, but it is cube draft all weekend. So that's why we're focusing on it for this episode, because this won't be the last one of these, I assume, and we want to get you prepared for it going forward. So with that in mind, let's crack some packs here and see
before we get to that, I do want to just point out that the format last time was the best format they've had. Like,
totally, man, it was sweet.
It's not 100% there. The only thing the only gripe I've left, again, this is small potatoes compared to the fact that A, we're getting to draft, and B, we're getting like this 2 drafts, 1 loss to give sort of deal. I wish the drafts weren't necessarily like gated to those time windows where you had to do draft 1, then wait 4 hours, then do draft 2.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty minor. Overall, the fact that you get to do a draft, go 3-1 or 4-0, it's not the super harsh cut of going, having to go 3-0.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go 4-0, you get that extra loss to give in draft 2, which is awesome. And then you get to draft again. And then that's the draft with the super high stakes. If you make it to the second draft, every win is your first win is your first win is just some gems. Your second win's 500. Your third win's 500, and your last win's 1,000. They even made I think a better scaling structure. So everything about this is really good. And I just want to say that the Arena Opens are becoming just my favorite tournament of all. Just they're so good.
Yeah, and it's also been really great. We have to really give a lot of credit to the people that work on these at Wizards, because you've seen the iteration happen, right? Yeah. You've seen feedback come in. They could have not done a bunch of this stuff. I still would have played them, right? Like, let's be honest. I still would have just lined up to play.
We did play them.
I played all of them. Everyone I've played. But they've still improved the product and given us what we really, really want, which, I mean, this is so cool that they're doing the cubes. I still just can't believe that this is the world we live in now, where we get to do this. And we got to give them a lot of credit for that, because they could have they really could have, and still had us lining out the door, but they've continued to push to make this better and better. And I love the flatter structure, man, because I have made day 2 twice and lost my opening round. And one of them, I had a really good deck and just, bad matchup. My opponent had a perfect draw, whatever. And it was like, I was out. And it was like, man, like, I really, really would love to have another crack at this thing. And this to me is a sweet spot. Like, I don't need it to be triple elimination or something, but I love the fact that you have a loss to give. And then I also love that you're really playing for something on that first draft. Like, if you get to 4-0, having, like, that was a difference for me. Like last Arena Open, I did 4-0 the first draft, and I lost my first round of the second draft, and I still scrapped it out to get to $500. If I would have just been like, oh, well, I went 3-1 and not really focused or tried as hard or whatever, just if I got to 3 wins and just sort of let the last one go. And by the way, the last round in the first one was really tough and really close, and I had a lot of close judgment calls and stuff, I wouldn't have made the money, right? So, that really matters. And I totally agree with you. I love this structure, and I do hate getting up early in the morning, but I guess there's no way around it if you're going to get through, potentially eight rounds of traditional over the course of one day. You do need to kind of get things moving. So
yeah, and even more than just the fact that we've ended up in a good place is how clearly willing they are to take feedback and to iterate and slowly hone in on what is best. Like, these changes, it didn't all go from point A to point B right away. It started in one place. minor changes were made throughout, and then eventually we've gotten here, and this is pretty close to the end game in my opinion. I don't think it really needs to get much better than this. So
yeah,
looking forward to it for sure.
Okay, so with that said, how do you win in cube draft in this format? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a couple of cracker packs. We'll do the first one here now, and then we'll use these as our jumping off point to go for a deeper discussion of the decks that we really like in cube, and sort of how this cube works, because this cube is actually, it shares similarities with some of the cubes that you can play on Magic Online or that we've played before, but it really is its own thing, and it is different than those cubes. Okay, so Cracker Pack number 1. It looks like we've got Micromancer.
I found Micromancer to be solid. Like, it's got it's got a decent amount of things that you can go for, and if you're getting like a Lightning Bolt or a Ronos Vortex or a Brainstorm, you feel like you got your money's worth out of the card.
Yeah, and it also, this type of card highlights one of the most important inflection points when it comes to how you approach Arena Cube, which is that the big picture thing here is that there's a lot of very expensive cards and not very many cheap cards that you want to put in your deck. And Micromancer is funny because it kind of doubles down on that, right? Because it's like, oh, go get a great cheap card. It's like, well, if I had those, I'd be doing fine anyway, right? And but if you do, you can definitely play it. Next is Precursor Golem.
Been pretty impressed with this one. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the removal exists in Cube, but some decks just don't have much removal, just naturally. So you end up in a spot where you get to play Precursor Golem and they can't kill it. And I mean, that's actually really strong.
Right. That's the thing that's hard to remember, because it does get killed so often and kill all 3 of them. But anytime it goes unchecked, it's broken. I mean, 5 mana for 9/9, like 9 power, 9 toughness over 3 creatures. That shores up any assault that you may be taking, or puts you way ahead on the ground in any game that was, you were ahead in or at parity. So yeah. And there actually is less removal in this cube than you would expect, although there's still enough to go around. Rada, Heart of Keld, that's the 3 mana 3/3 Rada that can get pumped up.
Yeah, unless you play lands off the top. It's okay. If I'm red-green, I'll play it. Right now, I'd be taking Precursor Golem. I actually think it's better in Cube than it is in normal limited. I just think you're more likely to run into something that can't actually kill it.
Yeah. People are playing like an all-out ramp deck or something, and they're not necessarily packing a bunch of spot removal.
Yeah, so I'm pretty happy taking also a colorless card instead of like a double-colored card. I'm not really interested in taking double-colored cards if I can avoid those. The
next is called Baba Lysaga Night Witch. It's 1 green black for a 3/3 legendary human. It says tap, sacrifice up to 3 permanents. If there were 3 or more card types among the sacrifice permanents, each opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 life, and you draw 3 cards.
I think this card is playable in some decks, but I'm not really looking to take a black-green card of all things first pick.
So what's the deal here? You sack like a creature, a land, and like a random artifact, and it pops off?
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to put trinkety kind of stuff into your deck to make it work. Okay. But I just haven't, found that to be something that comes together all that often. And again, a black-green is not one of the best color combos, and taking a gold card first has to be a fairly good card. And this is not it.
This next card is just proven itself to just be on rate, on raw power alone, worth it in most decks of really any format. It's Isika's Chariot. I mean, card's just a house. Like, it is just an absolute beast of a Magic card.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically 3 kinds of classes of cards. There's the cheap cards that cost 1 and 2 mana. There's the mid-range cards that cost 3 and 4 mana, and then there's like 5+ up to 9, as we'll see in this pack. And I think that Isika's Chariot is like one of the better cards around 4 mana, because it's hard to answer with 1 card. Frequently, it'll leave back the equipment, even if they do answer the cats, and that's still, as we've seen in Standard, pretty good. And puts a lot on the board. It really gives you the kind of start you're looking for. So right now, my pick's Isika's Chariot. I don't mind first picking that card. Yeah,
it's also nice because if you do pick up a lot of the ramp in a cube like this, actually comes at the 2 mana slot. So you do something on 2 that gets you to 4 mana on turn 3, and this is a very nice thing to play on that turn. Next is one of my pet cards in the format. It's Double Vision. So this is the 3 red enchantment that lets you copy your first instant or sorcery spell each turn and choose new copies.
Yeah, so Double Vision is a more committal card than most.
It's very build around, yeah.
You're almost assuredly going to be blue-red if you really want to make this card good, because blue has a lot of the spells that you want to combine with it. It is a good card. If you end up in blue-red, I think this is a pretty solid one, especially since, Lightning Bolt's in this cube. Sometimes you get to go turn 6 Double Vision Lightning Bolt or turn 6 Double Vision plus one of the cantrips.
Yeah.
And, that's something you're pretty happy to do. But
yeah, this is one of my favorite. Like, there's a blue-red spells archetype that isn't like the ones that you're used to in normal draft, where it's like there might be a creature that says whenever you cast, something good happens. It's a much more kind of explosive version where you get to do things that feel really broken when they go off, and Double Vision is absolutely part of that equation. If you first pick Double Vision here, though, it's a type of card that's one of the best cards in your deck, or it's in your sideboard. So it's a very high variance way to start. But, in Cube Draft, I'm much more willing to fire it off on a card like Double Vision and just see if the deck's there. Because if you don't end up playing it, it doesn't hurt you as much as if you give up a really great first pick removal spell or something in regular draft. All right, so the other end of the spectrum here is Bomat Courier. That's the 1-mana 1/1 haste, and whenever it attacks, you can start tucking cards under it and sack it. And discard your hand, and then you get those cards. This is kind of a mono red staple.
Yeah, and I don't have any problem first picking Bomat Courier. It actually might be the card that we've seen so far with the highest expected win percentage, because as we're going to talk about, one of the better decks in Cube is mono red aggro, and Bomat Courier is very good in that deck. Yeah.
So if you're inclined to go for that, and look, if you're playing for thousands of dollars. Right. Yeah. Double Vision's a fun card, but you might want to lean towards Bomat Courier and just get people dead. Next card is Inquisition of Kozilek.
It's solid. I mean, this is a good card. It's a 1-mana card that can kind of disrupt their early plays. There's a couple of reasons I don't really like this card. One of them is that I find black to be one of the weakest colors to start with. I think that it's fine to play black, but it's not really one of the colors I consider a base color. I consider green, blue, white, and red all base colors. Black, less, like the least of all 5. I don't think there's a great base black deck. I play against mono black fairly frequently, but I don't think it's very good. Yeah. And also, some people's decks are just not very vulnerable to Inquisition. They just have kind of expensive cards in their deck. So,
yeah, that's the problem. Is it puts a lot of pressure on Inquisition, because if you fire it off on turn 1, you'll probably find something, and it'll probably be important, because again, the lack of resources that people face are on cheap cards that matter. But if you draw this a little later in the game, they usually have played those and they don't have as many in their deck, and you very easily could brick on it or find something mediocre. So Inquisition's traditionally a card I absolutely love in Cube, but in this Cube, I agree with Luis. It's down a bit.
I just don't end up with decks that have mana bases that can cast Inquisition in the first 3 turns that reliably. I mean, that's just not where I'm at, which is another strike against Altar of Ball, which is the...
Yeah, this is like a reanimation attempt.
Well, it's 3 mana for a 4/1 black skeleton token with Menace, and then it has Adventure, and then if you can also cast the as the Altar, which is 1 and a black, and you can pay 2 black, tap, sack, or exile a creature you control to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield.
At sorcery speed.
At sorcery speed. And yeah, I mean, there is a black-white tokens, Bastion of Remembrance, Blood Artist style deck, and people do play that deck sometimes. I don't think that deck is that great, honestly, so I wouldn't take Altar of Ball.
No, I've never seen this card do things ever. Hopeful Initiate is next. This is the white 1/2 with training, and you can pay 2 and a white and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control to destroy an artifact or enchantment. I mean, if you're in a white aggro deck, I would probably run this guy, but I'd never find myself in that spot in this Cube. I feel like, in the regular Cube, the white-based aggro decks are the most kind of underrated, highest performing archetypes. They're usually number 1. It's usually actually just the best deck you can draft in Vintage Cube and in Legacy Cube and stuff ends up being white-based aggro, but I haven't seen that quite as much here. What's your take on white-based aggro in this?
Oh, I think it's quite good, and I think if you're going to play the Arena Open this weekend, you'll run into more of it.
What do you think about Initiate in it?
great card. I mean, you're really happy to play it. Like
Yeah.
the whole strategy with these decks is to play something the first 3 turns of the game, including turn 1. So Hopeful Initiate fits right into that strategy. I think Beaumont Courier is better for mono red than Hopeful Initiate is for mono white. So unless you had a specific reason to take one of these, I don't think that I would take the Hopeful Initiate over Beaumont Courier. Of course, the next card is even more so. That's Elite Spellbinder, Apollo's invitational card or Worlds card. 2 and a white, 3/1 flying, and when ETBs, you get to look at their hand and exile a card, and they cost an additional 2 to play. This card's great because this card is great in the White Weenie deck. Slow down their Wrath, slow down whatever their 4-drop is or whatever, and is still good in something like White Blue. Like it's, I think, just a good card.
Yeah, it's a much more flexible option. Speaking of, you mentioned it earlier, by the way, 9 drops. Portal to Phyrexia is in this cube now. That's the 9 mana artifact that ETBs and your opponent sacks 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and it becomes a Phyrexian as well. So this is, just a classic, fantastic ramp payoff, right? Just like a great way to shore up a board state and take over a game late if you can get to 9 mana. And you absolutely can in this cube. The issue is that 9 mana is a lot more than 7, right? Like it's multiple turns usually for most decks before you can get to that 9 mana versus like 7. And most likely you're going to be able to find a 7 mana spell that will also more or less win you the game. It won't do quite as much as Portal. Portal is kind of a slam the door on the game type of card. But, if you get to cast it 15% more often, the 7 drop, and it wins only a few percent less, it's better. So I feel like just a straight up 9 drop that's non-negotiable, like there's no prototype or no way to, make it cheaper, is probably not where you want to be, even though this card is like pretty obscenely powerful.
Well, the way I see it is, because all the things you said are true, there are decks I would put Portal to Phyrexia in and be happy with. I've had these ramp decks that are like really like, excellent at ramping, but I'm not going to start by doing that.
Right.
Like that's not the first place I'm going to be. So I'm not that interested in first picking Portal to Phyrexia. This is a card, if it wheeled in this pack and I was green ramp, or I saw it in a later pack, I'm a lot more interested. But in this pack right here, I think it's just off the table. You're supposed to take Precursor Golem, Masika's Chariot, Beaumont Courier, Elite Spellbinder. These are all valid picks. I would not consider Portal to Phyrexia a valid pick right here.
Yeah, and one way we can describe this Arena Cube format is the shortcut that we often tell people for cube ramp decks, right, is to deprioritize finishers because those are usually easier to come by, and prioritize the important early stuff like the ramp cards or the ones that interact really well, or the kind of one-offs, cards like Oracle of Moldiah or something, right, that are just hard to replace. Like there's not that many cards that have an effect like that. And so those usually get picked over, some generic 7 or 8 mana finisher in that color sphere. You take that and amplify it. It's that same approach. It's that same idea, but it's even more so in this cube than it is in the others. Taking Portal Phyrexia, the only argument that you could make is that it's colorless, right? So that like if you're ramping, you can get to it, but that does not hold up. You are 100% going to be able to find finishers. Yeah. So you have to focus on either the super cheap stuff that we mentioned, or like the cards that you just mentioned that are in this pack, which are harder to replace. Like there isn't really another Precursor Golem, right? Like if that card's going to be good in a matchup, it's going to be great in the matchup, and you'd much prefer that.
Also, it's not even colorless. It's a green card. So
yeah, that's true. At 9 mana, it just is green. That's a great point. Yeah. Portal Phyrexia, not this time. Speaking of green cards, the World Spell. I'm just not interested in the World Spell.
No, I think it's bad. Yeah. I think it's just actually not a good card. It's
right.
The 7 mana saga. You get to look at the top 7 and put a permanent into your hand twice, and then you can put 2 permanents into play, all non-saga for chapter 3. This is like the opposite of what I want. I spend 7 mana and I don't affect the board at all.
Yeah, I need it now. Silverback Elder. This one's okay. This is the 2 GGG, so it's green intensive, but it's only 5 mana, and you get a 5/7. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you can choose one of 3. You can gain 4 life, destroy an artifact or enchantment, or look at the top 5 cards of your library and put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then the rest on the bottom in a random order. So you can get a land. You can naturalize something, or you can gain 4 life whenever you cast a creature. And it's a 5/7. It's huge. It's hard to kill. And the key here is that it's only 5 mana if you're heavy green or mono green.
Yeah, it's a okay card. I'm not really that interested in taking it over Seeka's Chariot. I think that'd be crazy.
That's insanity. Yeah. It's much better. Our last card up for this first crack a pack is Awaken the Woods. I'm interested in this actually. So this is a green X sorcery where you get X/1/1 green forest dryad land creature tokens.
Bunch of dryad arbors. You get a bunch of arbors. Basically, yeah. on the board, they're basically Llanowar Elves. They tap for a green, though they do count as lands for whatever.
For if something cares about that. Yeah,
I think this card's probably good. I haven't really played with it. I've played against it once and then I wrathed, so it didn't really do that much. But I think the card is probably fine overall.
I think the question is how. So the way I look at it is, what does it do on 3 mana and what does it do on 7, right? So like, what does it do kind of at the earliest time I can cast it and have it affect the board? And it's a Llanowar Elf for 3. So that's really pretty bad, right? Like that is a very tough pill to swallow, although at least it does something would be kind of the answer there. And what does it do at like the 7 mana slot? Well, you get 5/1/1s. Now they do make more mana if that's relevant, but like, is this the type of card that I can use as a finisher in my ramp deck?
No, what this card does is it lets you cast Ulamog and Portal to Phyrexia.
Right.
Right. That's or some X spell for 1 million. Like,
right.
So it's kind of a win more in the sense that on 6 mana, which is where your finishers want to start, you just cast another ramp spell, but it does ramp you to 10, 11 mana.
It does, and it does create a board presence where like you could use one of them to chump block a big attacker or double block something, so it's close to me. Like basically the way I see it is each of these questions that we asked, it doesn't quite meet the bar for what you'd want, or it's even a good notch below. The question becomes, if I give you all of those in one card, would you play it? Would you play a very mediocre ramp spell? Would you play a pretty mediocre finisher? Would you play a pretty mediocre mid-range spell, but you get them all wrapped up in one card? My gut is that we're never going to prioritize Awaken the Woods in the format. I don't think it's ever going to be like a go-to, like, oh, I got an Awaken the Woods, we did it. Like, it's not going to be that card, but that you'll see it every once in a while. That's probably where it'll end up. What do you want to take here?
My pick would
Chariot, Golem?
My pick would probably be Chariot. I find myself green often enough. I think it's a pretty solid card, and I'm just pretty kind of happy with Chariot regardless. I think Precursor Golem is a fine pick, and I think Elite Spellbinder, Bowmat Courier. Those are the 4 picks I would be looking at. I think if I were playing day 2 of the Arena Open, I would still take the Chariot here.
Yeah, so my inclination is to take Double Vision, and I recognize that that's like a little bit wild. But I do think that that's an irreplaceable card in that broken deck if you can get it. And none of these cards to me are like, oh my God, like Seeka's Chariot's a fine Magic card. Precursor Golem's fine. But the highest upside card out of this whole pack is Double Vision to me. And Double Vision does actually go in a legitimate build around deck if it's open. Now you're going to have to get through probably most of pack 1 and even a chunk of pack 2 before you'll really know if it's there or not. So I wouldn't be all in on it in the sense of that. I just feel like I'm not giving up much by taking a shot on what I feel is one of the highest upside decks in the format. Beyond that, I kind of like Bowmat Courier, like, just like go the other direction where you just go super low to the ground. Aggressive 1-drops are nice. It's colorless too, and it's red really, but All
right. Real talk. Mm-hmm. This is day 2 of Arena Open, draft 2. You've made it to the second draft. You're going to first pick Double Vision over Seeka's Chariot?
Yeah.
You're not going to do that.
Yeah, I would.
You're not.
I would.
All right.
Why not?
Well, I like money, I guess, is the reason why not.
I mean, I guess the question that comes up is, do you think that the blue-red spell, kind of go off spells deck is real?
Oh, I definitely do. And I think Double Vision is very good in that deck. But Double Vision goes in exactly one deck. Seeka's Chariot goes in like 5 decks.
Yeah, I just view Seeka's Chariot as very, like, maybe you're higher on. I just view it as like super replaceable. Like, give me any green 4-drop and it might be like near the top of that list, like top 25% of those cards, but not like, it just doesn't, like, it's very, very replaceable to me, where Double Vision is basically 100% not.
I think Asika's Chariot is a little bit better than that. I think that's part of it. I think having that flexibility is good, and I think Elite Spellbinders also you can make a really good argument because great in mono white, but also if you end up blue white and you play Elite Spellbinder, you're pretty happy. If you're green white ramp, Elite Spellbinder is still exactly the kind of card you want, right? It blocks their 2-drop and disrupts their 4-drop. So
I think I like that argument for Spellbinder. I think it is harder to replace than cards like Chariot or Golem. For me, I don't know. I feel like I don't want to spend a pick on like a solid mid-range whatever. I want to try to take a shot because I mean, man, if I end up with like the broken double vision deck, like I can 4-0 with that. Like that's a deck I can actually run it up. And get to the 2K. Where if I draft like an okay mid-range green deck, I look at it and go, okay, this is going to be tough day 2 competition. Most people are going to know what they're doing mostly. I'm not Luis Scott-Vargas, right? So I'm going to look at it and go, I'm going to take a little bit of a flyer on getting a deck that has like tremendous upside or whatever.
So one more argument, before we move on to our second Crack-a-Pack here. Mm-hmm. I think in the Arena Open specifically, you're actually going to play against a fair amount more aggro.
Oh, interesting.
Asika's Chariot's really good there.
If that's true, then that would definitely swing me because I actually don't really want to be doing the blue-red deck against a field of aggro. Like if that's the case, the reason that I like the blue-red deck is because when you do normal drafts, like non-money, cube drafts, people are doing ramp and goofy stuff and you can just overpower them with it. You're a little bit faster than them, but you're as or more powerful. But if everybody's playing aggro, I kind of want to be casting double vision.
I don't know that everyone's going to be playing aggro as much as everyone's going to either be playing aggro or be a little more prepared for it because more people, when you put money as the primary goal of playing these drafts rather than just fun, though obviously the whole experience is still fun. Mm-hmm. People will take what they think will win more than what they think is fun. They're less likely to take double vision and they're more likely to take Beaumont Courier.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, there's even people that would draft mono red at the World Championship if it was cute.
It's true. It's true.
They have no integrity and they just would throw it all away. No, that's true. One interesting note, by the way, about the aggro stuff is that aggro is actually not that supported in this cube by bulk numbers. Like, if there's 4 people trying to get all the red and white cards to be aggressive, like I wouldn't want to be one of those 4 people. Like you look at the packs as they come up and there's like a card or maybe 2 for aggro per pack. And everything else is like rampy lands and all this like kind of nonsense stuff. And I would be like, I'm curious to see, we're not going to have enough sample size to actually balance out a metagame for, I don't care about having fun. I just want to win. Therefore, I'll draft, the Sulfuric Vortex deck in the Vintage Cube or whatever. But like, there's a lot of stuff that just isn't there bulk wise for aggro. And I am curious how many aggressive players an average cube table could support for this cube. Do you have a sense for that?
Well, as we talk about aggro, I'm going to reiterate this point, but it is really important for aggro to be as close to monocolor as they can get. Mm-hmm. I think it is actually really bad if you like. I like mono red and I like mono white, and I think white red or like red black are really not good places to be because you either are going to spend picks on lands, and in this case specifically lands that are those 2-color lands, not like the 3 or 4 color decks that are happy with whatever lands they get. Or you're going to stumble sometimes, and the whole point of aggro is you don't stumble. The whole point is that you play your 16 planes and you just curve out and you don't worry about it from there. So that does mean that it's going to be hard for there to be like 2 mono white decks at the same table,
Yeah. I mean, and like the pack that we just opened, there was a Courier, which is a good aggro card. There's an Elite Spellbinder, which is a good aggro card. And then there's Hopeful Initiate, which is pretty good, but you do have to be white, to make it work. And that's fine. That seems like enough, roughly speaking. But like, let's go to the next Crack-a-Pack and we'll keep an eye on it as well. The first card up is called You Line Up the Shot. It's green for an instant. You can choose one. You can conjure a card named Plummet to your hand, or you can conjure a card named Naturalize to your hand, or you can draw a card. So it's kind of like a main deck sideboard card with low downside.
Yeah, but also kind of low upside because you're paying 3 mana for Plummet or 3 mana for Naturalize, or you're just cycling. So I don't think it's terrible to run this card. I have not ended up running this card though.
Yeah, I would be happy to bring it in out of the board as a really versatile card. Next up, here's an aggro card, Viashino Pyromancer. This is a good one too. It's 1 and a red for a 2/1, and when it ETBs, it does 2 damage to a player or planeswalker.
Yeah, this card's pretty solid. I mean, This is not the kind of card you want to first pick. The whole point is that you first pick Beaumont Courier or Lightning Bolt, and you get 5th pick Viashino Pyromancers. So if you do have to first pick this, I'm a little less happy.
Yeah,
but it is the kind of card you do want in your aggro decks.
Cold Steel Heart. This is the 2 mana artifact. It's actually a snow artifact. ETB's tapped, but when it ETBs, you choose a color and it taps for 1 mana of that color.
Oh, I love pick 1, pack 1 and Cold Steel Heart. It's exactly what every deck except aggro wants.
Yes.
If you end up in aggro, you don't want this card. But does your red-green ramp deck want it? Yes. Does your blue-white control deck want it? Also, yes. It's just blue-red spells is actually on the lower end of wanting this because you'd rather just go opt into Lightning Strike, into Counterspell or whatever. But they'll still play it and be very happy with it. So
and it's colorless.
It does not commit you in any way. So pretty high on Cold Steel Heart. It's going to take something pretty good to get me away from taking this first pick.
We've also mentioned how important ramp is. It's a heavily supported archetype in the format. And the importance of playing relevant things on turn 1 and 2 when you can. And this just covers all those bases. Next is Mephit's Enthusiasm. I don't know if I know this card. This is 1 and a red for a sorcery. It does 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If excess damage was dealt this way, note the excess damage. Then you get a boon with when you cast your next creature spell, it perpetually gets +X+0 where X is the noted number.
So
God, can I just burn these cards in a never-ending fire oven? Mephit's Enthusiasm. This is just ludicrous.
I mean, look, it's basically a flame slash, a 2-mana flame slash, lava coil, whatever, and then for every excess damage, your next creature gets that as a power boost.
Yeah,
it's a fine card. I mean, this goes well in your ramp decks or your blue red spells decks or your mono red aggro deck. It's good in all those. Probably even the best in the aggro deck because I had someone cast this on my 2 toughness creature and then play Krenko, the one that when you attack makes that many tokens for its power. So
that's disgusting.
Yeah, that was bad. But I would still take Cold Steel Heart. I don't think you're supposed to take Enthusiasm, pick 1, pack 1 over Cold Steel Heart.
There you go. And there's another aggro card here, right? Again, these aren't premium, but they're, definitely playable. The Pyromancer and the Enthusiasm here. Next is Zagoth Triome. That's the my favorite one, the blue, black, green Triome.
I think taking Triomes early is fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually a little lower on lands in this cube than I have in previous versions.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
I kind of, maybe it's just, I've done about 5 drafts so far. And I think that the lands are coming late enough that I haven't been going out of my way to get them.
Agreed.
That's the kind of thing where you kind of got to read the room because if you're drafting a 3-4 color deck and other people are taking your lands, then you need to take them early to make that work. But if people aren't taking lands, then you kind of don't want to be the person first picking lands when you're not supposed to be taking lands early.
Right. And that's the kind of thing that we'll sense out. But my sense is the same as yours early, which is that I haven't had to prioritize lands. Also, I haven't drafted 4 or 5 color decks. It doesn't seem like you're really incentivized to do so here. There's not that many payoffs. There are a few here and there, but I haven't been like, all right, here we go. First pick Zagoth Triome, off to the races. It's been more like I'm 2 colors with a splash, something like that. And my decks felt plenty powerful. Stomping Ground is next, so similar discussion there. Thragtusk. So here's an anti-aggro mid-range card that's just kind of good in any deck that can cast it.
I like Thragtusk. I'm not unhappy to first pick a Thragtusk. I would still probably take Cold Steel Heart over Thragtusk. Mm-hmm. I think that just the non-committal nature of that, I think, is pretty strong because sometimes you first pick Cold Steel Heart and your second pick's Teferi, right? The blue-white Teferi, and then your third pick is time wipe, and then you get Elspeth Conquers Death, and then you get a counterspell, and you're like, wow, I'm really glad I took Cold Steel Heart.
Yeah.
Of course, Thragtusk and Teferi, you can play them both in the same deck too. I'm not saying you can't, but I, for the most part, am not looking to take. If 2 cards are comparable, taking the colorless card is usually a pretty good idea.
Gallagreeters is next. This one's actually kind of interesting to me. This is the 1 and a green 1/1. And whenever another creature ETBs under your control, you can choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can put a +1/+1 counter on this guy, or you can get a tapped treasure token, which is that's a big upside. And then against aggro, you can gain 2 life. If you're a green based creature deck, not fully on the ramp end of things, but a little bit more towards the, I'm going to be playing out creatures like Thragtusk and stuff like that. I keep emphasizing that you want to prioritize good plays on turn 1 and turn 2. And this is actually pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think if you have enough other cheap creatures that you're getting good value out of this, like you're triggering it every turn, then yeah, this card's great. If your opponent can't kill it, like getting a treasure every turn, getting 2 life against aggro, those things can be very potent.
Yeah, for sure. Fires of Invention is in this cube. Is this just try to ramp up the nonsense factor here, or is this a card we should actually pay attention to?
Oh, I like that. I had a 6-win deck earlier today that used fires. It was like a 4-color deck, and if your deck is primarily playing at sorcery speed, like you don't have a bunch of interactive like counterspell type cards, then having fires as a way to just play 2 spells a turn, not have to worry about color requirements or spend mana on other things. Golos is the classic combo. The fires also gates you on those cards, but overall, I think fires can be pretty good. I wouldn't first pick it, but I'm still on Cold Steel Heart followed by Thragtusk here. But I think fires is one to keep an eye on. If you're, red X mid range, grid green X mid range, and you've got a lot of expensive sorcery speed spells, yeah, fires can be really good.
Do you play more card draw in Fires of Invention decks?
So card draw is weird in fires decks where. If you draw too many cards, you're just going to end up with a bunch of cards you can't cast.
Right. Because
fires is gating you at 2 a turn.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you use card draw, then fires really helps you maximize your mana. Where like if you have 6 lands in play, it's letting you play 12 mana worth of cards a turn if you play 2 6-drops or that sort of thing.
Yeah. Also, you're down a card when you play the fire, so you want to make sure you still have some action to actually put down, Anyway, interesting. Next is Witch of the Moors. This is a 3/black 4/4 with Death Touch. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature and you return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This card feels a little lost in the cube, but when it triggers, it's insane. Like it's actually super powerful. Like you're like, wait, what? And you have to start sacking your things. They're getting value back out of the yard and they can kind of go off with it, but it doesn't feel fully supported in the cube at this point.
Yeah, I haven't been impressed with it. I've had people play it against me and yeah, it's scary, but one of 2 things has mostly happened. They play this and don't have a life gain card immediately. So it's a 5-mana 4/4 Death Touch. That's not above the bar. It's below the bar for cube.
Definitely.
Or they play it and they do have a life gain. They play this with their Blood Artist out and they're like, oh, I'm going to get you. And then I counter or kill Witch of the Moors because it's now a threat and they don't get that much out of it. Yeah. So I've been, like you said, it feels a little bit lost in the cube.
Voracious Great Shark. So this is 3 blue 5/4 flash. And when it ETBs, you counter target artifact or creature spell.
I like this one. I mean, this is the exact kind of card that can really get you an advantage in like the mid-range or control mirrors where they cast their 5-drop and you're like, you play the Voracious Great Shark, all of a sudden they have nothing in play. You have a 5/4 and all your mana's untapped because you get to untap, hit them for 5 and then have, disallow up. But I think you should still take Cold Steel Heart.
Yeah. Voracious Great Shark is the type of card that I like to have in my deck. I don't like to first pick it though. Exactly. Displacer Kitten. This is 3 and a blue for a 2/2 cat beast with avoidance. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. I mean, this is just too cute in my mind. Like, I don't mean it just because it's a
blink
cat.
Deck, but I don't think that's actually true.
A 4-mana 2/2 creature. Right, that needs me to cast non-creature spells to blink my non-land permanents, but let's be realistic, mostly creatures. It's a tough mix, and it's only a 2/2 for 4, so if it is going to be a problem, almost any removal spell in the cube will kill it. Maul of the Skyclaves. This is the 2 and a white equipment with equip cost 2 white, and when it enters the battlefield, you attach it to a creature you control, and the creature gets +2/+2 flying and first strike.
If you're really a fan of white aggro, I could see just first picking this. This is a very strong white aggro card. You put this on something, hit them for 5 or 6 in the air sometimes, and then they're in a lot of trouble. But it's making a pretty strong statement. I don't think you're supposed to play this outside of exactly mono white.
Yeah. They put Urza Lord Protector in the cube, so that's the one blue white 2/4. that makes artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you can pay 7 mana and transform it. I don't even know if the other half is in here, so we won't even bother, but
it is, but
okay.
I also still am not super jazzed about it.
That's Might Stone and Weak Stone, right?
Yeah, the Might Stone and Weak Stone.
And then it becomes like a super Urza Planeswalker. How do we feel about it just straight up? 3 mana, 2/4 that makes stuff cheaper.
Not particularly good.
And then our last card it's a really nice one. It's the Great Henge. Remember this one? 7 green for a legendary artifact. And it costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you have like a 4-powered creature, it just knocks 4 mana off of the cost. And then what this thing actually does is it taps for green, and you gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a freaking card. You know, if you want a ramp target, if you want a thing that can absolutely take over a game, the Great Henge is definitely on that list.
Yeah, I mean, this is a card that takes it's not the most onerous of build arounds. It just means have a bunch of creatures in your deck. You want Thrag Tusks and Lovestruck Beasts and that sort of thing. But I think that first picking it is just, look, in the right deck, this might be the best card in this pack. Where there's some decks where you add your red-green ramp deck that has a lot of creatures in it. Great Henge is just amazing, but I don't think you're supposed to first pick it over Cold Steel Heart or Thragtusk. Those are the 2 cards I keep coming back to that I think are just the best to first pick here.
Yeah, I actually would take Cold Steel Heart out of this pack. I really value the fact that it hits this format exactly where it needs to be hit, and also keeps you open. Like that is just, there's not that many cards that meet that criteria, and I would take it. And again, the pressure I feel, you know how when you draft normally, you feel pressure to get removal, right? There's something in the back of your head that says like, I need to check that box where I have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 removal spells in my deck. So like if I have a deck that has no way to remove my opponent's threats, I'm going to have a hard time winning regardless of how good my threats are. And so you feel that when you sit down to draft, you're thinking in the back of your head, like I got to get some removal, got to pick up some of this stuff. When it comes to this cube, it's not removal, it's 2 drops. It's things that matter on that low end. And so if I can check one of those boxes early, I'm really happy to do so.
Yeah, I think that it gives you the freedom, kind of like you said with the Seeker's Chariot, like part of the reason you didn't want to first pick it is it felt like it's a lot more replaceable. And that's true. I think that there is some truth to that, where if you first pick Cold Steel Heart, if you first pick Counterspell, you first pick Lightning Bolt, you're just opening the door for you to take good cards later and be pretty happy with those cards. That's
right. And in Cube, that is usually the name of the game, right? A lot of times we'll recommend taking lands early in the Vintage Cube or in the cubes on Magic Online, for example. Like, why? Well, even if you're passing good stuff early, if you pick up those lands and cover your bases, then for the next 2 packs, you can do whatever you want. And while that isn't quite the case in Arena Cube, if you do pick up those early board, the cards that do the things you want to do early in the game for 1 and 2 mana, that'll allow you to take the big payoffs later. So we talked about that in broad strokes. So let's talk about some of the best decks, though. What are some of the stuff that you like to see or that you like to try to go for in this Arena Cube format?
One of them is just these green multicolor ramp decks. And there's a lot to talk about there. First of all, you can pair green with, I think, almost any color and have a decent ramp strategy. The one I've liked the most, if I had to pick one, is actually green-red, because red complements it nicely with early removal, which is one of the really big parts that the deck is missing. So you've got Flames of the Firebrand, Pillar of Flame, Fiery Impulse, Lightning Bolt, Mephit's Enthusiasm, even things like Magma Quake. And you're combining those with your green ramp and then your big cards. Plus, Chandra, Torture Defiance is one of the best cards in the cube. So I have liked green-red ramp, though green-blue is fine, green-white is totally fine. Green-black I draft a little less, but even then, you could have early black removal, and there's good ramp payoffs in every color. So that's part of it. And sometimes these decks are 3 colors, 4 colors, whatever it is, because you end up in a spot where you're able to just use the green ramp spells to enable the Elspeth Conqueror's Death or the Sphinx's Revelation, Golos into anything you want, that sort of thing.
This is, to me, the green base ramp is the default deck. Like it feels like the people who built this cube had that in mind on some level, right? It's like pretty well supported. There's a ton of great green payoffs. I know it's not true, but it actually just feels like there's more green cards in this cube than any of the other colors. I don't know why, but green there's an emphasis on it.
Yeah, and a lot of the best early plays, mid-range plays, and late plays all happen to be green, right? You've got your 2-mana accelerants, even 1-mana accelerants in some cases, and then you also have, your Oracle of Moldias and Vivian Reed's Thragtusk, Sasika's Chariots, all those things. So, really cool stuff to be done with these green decks.
Yeah, if you like ramping, this is a sweet cube. What about the other types of decks?
So we mentioned it before, but mono white, mono red aggro are both quite strong. The goal with these aggro decks and just in general when you're looking at these is to go 1, 2, 3. That if you can just keep that in mind, where you want to play a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop, or better yet, 1-drop into 2 more 1-drops if you really have the low curve. It's not to say the aggro decks don't care about the mid or late game at all. Like there are things that they prioritize for that, but the most important thing is to have a good curve. And then once you have a good curve, you then want to look at, Chandra or other planeswalkers in mono red can be really strong. Mono white can use Restoration Angel or Adeline or even Elspeth Conqueror's Death and have a legit like late game plan. But mostly what these decks are trying to do is take advantage of the ramp deck not having a ramp spell or having their third land come into play tapped, or they have one card in play starting on turn 2, and they play one spell a turn starting on, if they're lucky, turn 2, but sometimes turn 3 and 4, and you've just run them over by then.
Right. I wanted to talk about blue-red spells, but did you have one other that you wanted to mention?
So the blue decks, I think, are kind of their own thing, and you can expand on blue-red spells, but a blue-based control deck is what it does is it replaces the ramp elements with counter spells and card draw. Yeah. So it has cards like Counterspell, Disallow, Spell Pierce, and it has, Impulse, Thirst for Discovery, that sort of thing, Behold the Multiverse. And instead of trying to play 7 drops or 6 drops, it's mostly trying to play cards that cost 4 or 5 mana and then end up in a spot where you're countering and interacting. The second color usually is there for things like, Lightning Bolt, Day of Judgment, Doomblade sort of things, like interaction basically on permanents that have actually hit the board. And you end up in a spot where against the ramp decks, Counterspell is a great card because they spend their time ramping. You let them do that, and then they try to cast their 7-drop, and you counter it.
It feels like a 2-for-1.
Yeah, I mean, you really kind of negated their play, and there's some really cool cards. Haughty Djinn and Tolarian Serpent from Dominaria are both really nice. I've actually been really impressed with both of those. 1-mana Tolarian Terrors is just not hard to get to, and the Djinn making everything cheap, going Djinn into a 2-mana counterspell for 1 mana is really sick. And that deck can function like blue-red spells. Blue-red spells has some specific things it's doing, like you said, Double Vision and Young Pyromancer. I don't know what strategies you've liked in the blue-red deck, but blue X kind of control, where you're not trying to play a bunch of colors, you're not trying to play a bunch of expensive cards, you're trying to leverage the powerful blue cards to enable you to stop their plays and play something in the mid game.
Yeah, I've really liked blue-white, for that. You get Teferi like as a great,
one of the best
mid to late game finishers, right? And then, you get to snipe some of the cards from mono white, like we talked about Elite Spellbinder. Like a card's just great in that deck, and it's like you get to just take that, and the ramp decks don't want that. Like that's one that you could even get quite a bit later. But yeah, with the blue red spells specifically, it plays a little bit more like a build around me type thing, right? The 2 cards that really make it pop off are double whatever. Double vision that we talked about in our first Kraka pack, and then Mizzix's Mastery is the other like absolute. It's the obscene blowout card, right? Because if you can get up to that 5 red overload, it allows you to cast all the cards from your graveyard at once.
I mean, you have just the Splinter Twin Magma Opus Mizzix Mastery combo where you turn 2, make a treasure, turn 3, Mizzix Mastery, and like that's going to win games against a lot of people. So you have this great play on turn 2, and also turns out to be a great play on turn 8.
Yeah, that's right, and that happens a lot. And then the enablers are definitely there. you can take advantage of cheap cards like Lightning Bolt and Lightning Strike, to just finish off your opponent in some scenarios with vision or whatever. They work really well with cards like Mastery because you use them early to keep the board clear and make sure you have some time, and then you get to play them again later when they can go to the face, kill a planeswalker, kill another creature, whatever. So that stuff's great. And then, some of the best enablers are cards like Faithless Looting, which is in this cube. And that's the type of thing that can just do absolutely stupid stuff, with these Mizzix's Mastery decks, because they help you find the Mizzix's Mastery, and then they load up your yard, and they really can do the thing where if your opponent isn't playing counter spell, like some way to counter a Mizzix's Mastery, they are just at your mercy. And if you've ever really popped off with a deck like this, it's dumb. Like, your opponent's like, are you serious right now? Like, you have this list of 7 cards and you're like, I'll cast that, I'll cast that, I'll cast that targets that, and you get to do all these things, and then they all happen. And halfway through this resolving, your opponent will concede because they go, oh my God, like, this is ludicrous, what's happening here. So the downside to this deck, though, is that it is a build around style deck where, like, if you don't pick up the Mizzix's Mastery and or the double vision, you take a major hit. If you're like, okay, Magma Opus, I'll take it, third pick and hope to pick up the Mastery at some point, and it just never shows up or somebody else grabs it. Like, a lot of the cards change value drastically in your deck, and it's usually down. So, you do need to be willing to kind of get those payoffs early and then try to fill in the blanks after, where if you're going into pack 3 and you're just like, boy, I hope I open a double visions or a Mizzix's Mastery, like, you're in trouble. Like, that is not the way to do it. You really, really want to start things off with Mastery and maybe Faithless Looting ideally. And then the double vision you'll usually be able to pick up because it's not as good as those cards. It's just a nice one to do if you have a bunch of cheap interactive things. So I love that deck. I think the ceiling on it is super high. It pops off earlier than the ramp decks usually as well. And it has the Oops, I Win combo that you mentioned before with Magma Opus into the Mizzix's Mastery on turn 3. And that's a lot of times just too much for any deck to handle. So that's a deck that I keep my eye out for. But, you really do need to kind of get lucky and get the key pieces early so that you can build a deck that way. What should people be prioritizing in broad strokes in the format?
So this doesn't have to count for the aggro decks, because the aggro decks are doing kind of their own thing. Again, curve is what they're most likely looking for. Mm-hmm. But for the non-aggro decks, whether that's ramp, control, or just like the various mid-range strategies, cheap interaction, I think, is the most important. Lightning Bolt, Infernal Grasp, Fiery Impulse, Swords to Plowshares, Counterspell, Mana Tithe. Cards that cost 1 and 2 mana, especially, like 3 mana, stops feeling cheap. Cards that cost 1 and 2 mana that interact with your opponent are at a premium. These are the most important cards in the cube. Then you have like Planeswalkers, because these are among the best 3 and 4 mana plays. Kaido Shizuki, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Like these cards are truly excellent and really get you kind of where you want to be, where you get to, like, the dream basically in this mid-rangey world is to play a card and have the opponent it answer one of your opponent's cards, and then they have to deal with it afterwards.
Yes.
Like that is exactly what you're looking for, and you're able to do that with these Planeswalkers, where you're like, Planeswalker, do a thing, and then they have a Planeswalker left over they haven't dealt with it yet. And then ramp are also really, really key. So these are the cards like Explorer, Cultivate, Mindstone. Mindstone and Cold Steel Heart are among my favorites because, as we mentioned, they kind of hit the colorless angle where you don't actually commit to anything by taking them. But having these cards that can let you ramp to the last category of card is really good. So these are like the cards that cost 4+ mana. So at 4 mana, you've got your Asika's Chariot type stuff. At 5 mana, you've got Elspeth Conquers Death, Glorybringer, Sky Sovereign. Like these are the kind of cards that you're really looking for. You're looking to put yourself in a position to play these cards that are like kind of haymakers. And this is where cards like Negate and Counterspell can really do some damage to you, right? You go to cast your Elspeth Conquers Death, they Spell Pierce it. That's like the worst case scenario. But even the Negate is pretty brutal. So that's why there's something to these blue decks. And then you go up the curve to your Ovenwald Hydras, your Titan of Industry, Sanctuary Warden, that kind of things. And then if you're really, really ramping, there's Ulamog and Phyrexian Portal or Portal to Phyrexia. And those, I think, are legit things to cast in this format, but you have to do a lot of work to get there. Your average ramp deck won't necessarily want a 9 or 10 drop.
Right. You have to really be built for it.
So basically, when I open the cube, I'm looking for a combination of cheap interaction, cards that ramp me, and some decks don't need ramp as much. Like I said, one of the things about like the blue X decks is they don't need ramp as much because they have good. Most of their cards cost like 2 to 3 mana, so they don't need a ramp spell, and instead they just bridge the gap by countering your opponent's cards or killing your opponent's cards. You want some powerful cards, like blue-white needs their, Teferi. Blue-black has things like Thief of Sanity or Cruelty of Gix. Like you want something to finish the game. And then you have your ramp payoffs, your like 6 and 7 mana plays that are pretty strong. And you have, maybe some planeswalkers. Overall, this is a kind of mid-rangey feeling cube. It's kind of funny because I think the best decks are the extremes, whether it's like the 1-drop white-red decks or the ramp decks that are playing, 7 drops.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of room in the middle. And honestly, a lot of the people you play against, you're just going to play against a person playing 2 of the colors of Magic, playing a bunch of cards that cost 4 to 6 mana.
Yes.
So I try to draft such that that's not what I am doing. I'm like a little more focused than that, whether that's like having a bunch of counter spells and playing all at instant speed, or just ignoring the middle part of the curve mostly and ramping to the big part of the curve, or going under it with aggro. But you're going to play against enough mid-range that like cards that are good in mid-range mirrors. Like if you think back to Standard, what was good in mid-range mirrors? Isika's Chariot, Sky Sovereign, Chandra.
Yep.
Those are Elspeth Conquers Death, and those are among the best cards in this cube as well.
Yeah, if you're going to be mid-range, that's where you want to be. Yeah, the takeaways from this episode, I mean, I'm sure that you've gotten the message by now, but when you open up your first pack on Saturday and you're like, okay, I want to make day 2, what should I take here? Cheap. Prioritize it. Yes, I know it feels bad to pass some big bomb that you think is really great, but I think remember Cold Steel Heart. Like the discussion that Louisa and I had on that. We opened a pretty good pack. There was some decent stuff in there, but we were both like, oh yeah, Cold Steel Heart, there it is, right? That's the one we want to, like we both felt relieved to see that in the first few cards, because now it meant, yeah, there might be something that like totally blows us out of the water and that we just have to take. But barring that, we're going to take Cold Steel Heart. And that isn't because Cold Steel Heart is a particularly powerful card. It's actually just a very generic 2 mana ramp type card, right? They've, think about Signets, think about, they've made 2 mana ramp cards forever in a variety of different ways, artifact based ones, sorceries, whatever. But we're excited about that because those are the types of cards that are hard to find. Those are the cards that should make the little alarm bell in the back of your head go off going, I need to pick stuff like this up. Because you can very easily get most of the way through pack 2 and do the thing where you change the orientation on Arena and go, what does my curve look like? And you're like, oh my God, I have no 2-drops or 1-drops. Like I have nothing. It's just literally my curve starts at 3, right? Because if you do not prioritize it, they will not just show up, because you'll take flashier cards over cards like, 2 mana rock. Right. And that's why if you get a little more experience with this cube, you recognize that those are actually the hot commodity, not the payoffs in the mid range and the late game stuff. Those will come to you kind of naturally. So if you take that away, if that's your main takeaway from the show, I feel confident you'll do much better in the Arena Open than if you had just sort of waited in there and just said like, oh, well, there's a Cold Steel Heart here, but there's a Thragtusk and that's a good card. I'll take Thragtusk. Right. Or there's an Isika's Chariot, or there's a medium grade planeswalker, say a 5 mana, 6 mana, Vivian or something like that. That's fine. Right. That does things. And you're like, ooh, planeswalkers, those are good. This one only costs 5. I'll take it. If you're passing that Cold Steel Heart, you're not going to get one again. And you're not going to have that many chances to pick those up. And I equate those early interactive cards and the early ramp cards to how you feel about removal in a regular draft. You can't look at an overwhelming remorse and just be like, oh, I'll just pick another one up later, right? Like people don't pass those. If you don't take it, you're not getting it. Now, there maybe is a strategy where you don't care, but most of them do care. And you should prioritize them, even if there's some other pretty spicy stuff in the pack, because you just need to check that box. So that's the big takeaways here is try to go against the grain a little bit by taking the cheaper stuff, and then also by maybe pushing yourself a little bit more towards the extremes rather than living in the middle like everybody else does. You either kind of want to go under or over the top of the mid-range decks in some way, unless your mid-range deck is just particularly really well built, solid mana, really powerful stuff. You're just not going to have that much of an edge over other people who are casting similar type of cards as you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can never end up with a deck with too many cheap cards, but you can definitely end up with a deck with too many expensive ones.
That is a great way to put it. So good luck to everybody in the Arena Open. This is a holiday weekend for us limited players. I mean, this is where the next chapter of our Arena life starts, right? I mean, this is, again, we get to live the dream of playing effectively high stakes cube draft from our computers or phones at home. And this weekend is when that really starts. So yay, everybody celebrate and let us know how you did, on your drafts, and if you made day 2 and if you made the money and all that. We wish you the best of luck. We are on social media. If you'd like to send us your list and let us know how things went. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can also find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. On the front page, there's links to all of our stuff, our streams and all that kind of stuff. And then like the banner, the CFB TCG player banner, like if you click that, it takes you to TCG player with our affiliate code, for example. It's all at lrcast.com. You can also find all the episodes of LR we've ever done over its quite long history now at this point. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So, we're in the holiday season, and obviously people have a lot of different traditions and a lot of different things they do. And one of the things I like most about this season is getting thoughtful gifts for people. And if you think about it from like an EV perspective, getting gifts can really generate a lot of value. Like, here's an example. We got a bunch of gifts for the teachers at Santi's daycare.
Oh, okay.
And they weren't expecting gifts, right? Like, obviously parents do that sometimes. But we got, spent $25 for like, a bottle of wine or some hand lotion, some like chocolate, that sort of thing, and put these little gift bags together and wrote a card. And that didn't take a lot of effort, and it didn't take that much time, but it disproportionately makes the person you're talking to feel valued, whether that's a friend, a family member, a teacher, leaving a tip for the mail carrier, that sort of thing. Like, it's surprising, especially the less they expect a gift, the more it means to them. And totally. I think that looking for places in your life where you can do that can be kind of nice. It's a good way to generate value, again, for everyone involved, where you're happy because you did a nice thing for someone else, and that makes most people happy. And then they're happy because you showed that you valued them. Like, you did something that made them think like, the thing I do is cool. And in this particular case, teachers are pretty much undervalued. So that seemed like a pretty easy way to kind of show the appreciation. And it's just something that I think of it because I think people, they look at the holidays and they look at, I have to spend a lot of money on gifts. And I actually don't think it's really about the money. I think you can get away with spending not that much money as long as, because the way I see it, the purpose of gifts is to show the other person you're thinking about them, that you appreciate them, that you want them to have a good holiday or a good whatever. Like, it doesn't, I'm, as you know, someone who gets gifts for people even just randomly, because if I find something that I think really fits, I like to do that. And I think getting away from consumerism, I think, is great. Getting away from that is great, but I think there's a lot more to gifts than just that. I think there's ways to gift things which are pretty meaningful and thoughtful. And I don't know, I just encourage people to look for ways to do that. I think it's a really cool part, and it doesn't even have to just be in the holiday season. It can be really any time.